Okay, I guess we're there. How are you doing, Alex?
I'm good. Just finished painting my apartment, so you can see the wall is white in the back now, not
I,
green anymore.
I love how you say I am done painting when someone else did it.
To be fair, we spent yesterday, I think, probably 8 hours or so cleaning up. So
Mm,
it felt like a proper activity.
yeah. Are you happy with the result?
Yeah, yeah, partially. There's still a place where uh, they still need to fix something next week,
Mm.
but uh, all good. How about you?
You see, I'm eating. It's
Enjoy.
Oscar has a fever, so he didn't.
Mm.
He didn't go to sleep yesterday. So he slept like until 8 or something, which is insane. Like personally, I never slept until 8 since I can't remember, which was amazing. But then like all the routines breaks down.
Mm.
So I just
Yeah.
managed to make a couple of slices of bread just before the stream. I also prepped a little bit because like now the React states thing is kind of living on its own a little bit for now, so that we can get some feedback from other people as well, and then I kind of copy over any minor changes and fixes into our repo. So I just merged a change there. But yeah, the idea really with this stream is that we go into this, like when we started developing the project editor for CodeSandbox projects, there were a few things we wanted to avoid that we learned from version 1. And a couple of things was we tried to activate strict null checking on the V1 repo, and that didn't work out very well. And it made us realize that, oh shit, we have a lot of state that's like out of like the logic operating on the state is like out of context. It doesn't understand what the state is. It's just doing a lot of if statements, like if this value is there, if that value is there, and it was very hard to reason about. So that was one thing we wanted to fix. And then it was since the project editor and CodeSandbox version 1 is very heavily event based, we had a lot of subscriptions that like we didn't have a good mechanism to dispose of the subscriptions, which we also wanted to fix. And that's why we're embracing React in the project editor, because React just does that out of the box. Like when you subscribe on a use effect, when you just return the disposer, and when the component unmounts, it's magic. Like the description, the subscription is gone. And then we tried exploring with these React states. Basically, it started with just exploring state machine concepts to make our logic more context aware of what the state actually is. And then that kind of led to React states, and then we took it a bit far. We made our own. Maybe I can open a branch for us to work in. We took it a bit far because where is the CodeSandbox applications? Oh, yeah, have you seen this bug? When I search for a project in the dashboard, I get this.
Oh, that's a dash. That's a command palette error. Anything with a name of undefined is usually a command palette issue, and it's because how we use the command palette. But the error comes from the library itself, so we need to put some guards against that.
Yeah.
Let me write this down.
Do we have a linear issue on it? Do you know? Have you
I don't
experienced
know.
it?
These errors appeared on the editor a while ago, and we fixed them. So I haven't seen one in the dashboard yet.
Maybe could you make
But
a
it
linear
says,
issue while I
yeah,
create a branch?
I'm putting a note there.
Awesome. Yes. So we have this in the project editor, and this is kind of funny. Like when we develop the project editor, we're developing the project editor in the project editor, and we had some inception confusion, I must admit. But it's pretty awesome that we've been dog fooding it from like since right after summer, I think, last year, which is kind of insane. Yes. So we have this folder called features, and features are really just context providers using React states, but we kind of tie that very closely together, as if like features was a first-class concept in React states, and it isn't. Like React states is just a way to take a plain reducer and express it with explicit states and transition by where you guard like the actions coming in and stuff. It's not like, it doesn't have to be a context provider, it definitely doesn't have to be a feature. So what we're doing in this refactor is that we're looking at each of these features and we evaluate, does it even need to be a context provider? Maybe it can just be a hook, and so on. And the goal is really to get it away from the features folder. And on top of that, we also have the thing that makes everything work. The thing that talks to our like environment backend that makes the terminals and the code and everything run, which is a project called Picture Client. It's like we talked about, it's kind of like Firebase. Like it's like npm install Firebase, but it's our development environment. And currently it's a quite low level imperative API where we explored adding a React abstraction with hooks on top, which also allows us to ask the question, do we even need this feature? Maybe it should just be a hook in this Picture Client React abstraction. So that's what we're going to explore.
I also liked when Picture was described as a headless code editor.
Yeah, exactly. Or development environment.
It's like this wave of like everything is like the headless version of something can be quite obnoxious, but I feel like people get the idea more easily when you think of, it's all the file operations without the UI on top of it, without the actual code editor, all the shell operations or the port operations and so on.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's also like we want Picture Client to be open source and available to everyone at some point. And when we reach that point, we really want to like make it feel like this project editor was built on top of Picture Client. It wasn't like intertwined and us doing a ton of custom stuff. It's to prove the power of Picture Client, that you can build any kind of development experience on top of it. So
that's why ideally we want to move as much as we can on the Picture side of things, so that working with the primitives that kind of the code editor needs is at a higher level, not at a more centralized level, right? Running on the container and then being distributed to all the clients.
Exactly.
Instead of having local state that is managed by each client and having to sync it and so on.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of funny, like we had no idea when we started this, like even like Picture, which is kind of our code name for the development environment, like how do we express that? How do we consume it? How do we make it collaborative? Like all these questions has been answered to some extent through the last year, and we made some good choices and we made some not that good choices just because we didn't know exactly where we were going. And one of those not so good choices was and that's the thing, like if you think back, we had to tie Picture Client very closely into the project editor to figure out how are we actually going to consume it at all in a React application. So I like that story better. Like we had to do that to explore how to use it, and now that we see how to actually use it, we can put the parts in the right places where it makes sense. Yeah, that's the narrative we're going with, Alex.
Yeah. Yeah, makes sense.
Cool. So I thought I did a I did a try refactor of the branch management, and I thought that could be a good first scope to talk about, because it's quite interesting, and also reflected a bit on how should we approach understanding how the feature actually works. And and since they are context providers, I was thinking that we could search for them. Where is it provided? Where is the actual provider inserted? And where are the hooks being used? That should give us some image of how it works, and maybe we could even use Excalidraw to kind of draw up the relationship and try to answer some questions that way.
Branch management is one of the most interesting ones in terms of not interesting ones. One of the most in need of refactor ones because it shifted a lot since we started. Originally, we had this branch panel actually on the sidebar there. So exactly where you see the file explorer, we had the branches listed, and you could search and create branches from there. So branch management was very local. It was thought of, okay, let's make a feature around this panel that handles all the different interactions with the branch. But then we started adding more functionality. Like we had the branch at the top where you can now click on the branch name, rename it, change the branch. You have the branches in the command palette, which is global. Then you have the create PR, like the fork button there. So all of the sudden branch management became like an app-wide thing, but it was initially thought, it was initially thought for the sidebar. So we even had a period where we had two providers in different parts of the application that were doing that. So definitely
that's such a good intro. Yeah, even giving some backstory to how the feature developed, and this is so important. This is often when you look at something and you see they made some choices that are not ideal, you think what were they thinking? And this is such a good example. But we weren't going to build a command palette like the forking and the changing, and we just had this thing in the sidebar, and then we made decisions based on that. So
actually, this would be an interesting feature to document decision in the code base. As you go, so have some sort of a story of the story of this file in a markdown next to the file, and then we timestamp. In July 2021 we had this, and this is why it was implemented. And then as we go, we keep adding there as we make changes, so that people can go backwards and understand why a certain part of the application is implemented the way it is.
That would be fun. Even the Google, they kind of automatically make stories out of your old photos, music and stuff. You could do the same for a file. Let's see. Okay, so we have branch management provider. So I'm just going to okay, so we're kind of testing a bit as well, how are we going to approach this together. It's kind of weird. It's why is it jumping all the time? Anyways, okay, so we have the branch management provider, and then we have the use branch management. And it's being and that god damn it, that's so annoying. There we go. By the way, it's the size here. Okay, I can go a little bit bigger. Oh, that's funny. Oh, why is it smaller? There we go. Okay, so where does branch management live? Okay, so branch management lives in the project editor. Let me close this thing over here. So the project editor, that component lives quite high up in the, like we have this workspace component that kind of, correct me if I'm wrong, Alex, but we have this workspace component, and then we have the project editor within that.
The workspace definitely has a nice story around it. But that's a story for another
like the workspace, when we look at the workspace feature, that will be a week-long stream just talking about that.
Oh yeah.
But no matter, we have the branch management provider quite high up, and this is really related to we have this really cool feature. Like when you fork, we kind of zoom out the whole freaking thing. Like it's amazing what Gianmarco built there. The transition when you do move between branches and do forking, and so that's what the provider gets. It gets some callbacks to do the branching animation, and we also do some routing.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like here, like how it ended up is like 3 different callbacks. One is the UI side, the animation. One is I think the project dispatch is kind of like the logic part where you need to change the active branch.
Yeah.
For the project provider, which is a bit it's a level higher. And the fork on fork is basically for the routing part, because once you switch, you go to a different URL.
Yeah.
But it makes kind of this provider very the opposite of encapsulated. I'm missing it right now. It's like it's very loose because you don't really. It's not like you can say just put the provider somewhere and expect it to work internally and then have it consume parts of it. You also have to basically connect it with all these 3 different concerns that are not related to the provider.
Yeah, and it's such an interesting thing. It's like, and it's also because the transition, like visually, the transition has to happen at the top of the application. The context provider is also forced to be like you can choose, of course. Like you can put the context provider right up there with the transition animations, or you can like pass a callback for dealing with the transitions, like down to the context provider somewhere in the middle of the tree, or like it's really interesting. It's, as you say, it's not like a typical way to do a context provider. But okay, so we have that branch management provider at the top, and then let's just look at where, maybe we should write that down. Project editor. And then we have the other one, which is use branch management. So it's being used by use fork command. Where do we actually use the command? Like we have hooks for adding commands, but where do we actually, is it a little bit where in the context of where the app is, kind of? Yeah, so
the hooks, these hooks just do like, they are like the definition of the command, so they just return an object with that perform function, and then this object is registered either in the command palette or it's used directly in a button. So wherever, if you search for use fork command, wherever you see that, it's where it will end up being consumed, like the provider also.
Yeah, so we can see that it's use fork command. Yeah, so it's kind of safe to say that it, like what I'm going for here is like, should it be a provider or should it not be a provider? To me, it makes sense that it's a provider because you have so many different places in the app we're using it. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think so. One particularity of branch management is that it is not really feature related. So it's somewhere in between. Like it is like feature will depend on the branch. Like you need to be careful with how you connect. There's a container switch, so there's uh, a lot of logic there. But the branch management itself, if we actually we can open a feature and see what the feature has inside,
Let's see.
because in my mind it's not a lot. There are not a lot of things happening here. It's mostly there's a fetch call for when you want to list all the branches, and we make that fetch. We have the endpoint in the API that goes directly to GitHub and gives us all the different branches that are available now for you to switch or import into a project. And then forking is again, so it basically does just API calls through the feature. It doesn't actually do any proper state management, so to say.
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess the question is, should it be a provider, or should there be should we have some specialized hooks that, or even use something like direct like SVR or something like that to just do all these requests to the backend for branch management?
Yeah. How would you deal with the callback, like related to the transitions and stuff? How would you? Because I do agree. Like just dealing with the branch data itself, but then we have this complexity of, okay, when you do change the branch, we have to trigger this transition. So it's not like state management related to the data. It's more state management related to creating the transition in the UI.
I wonder if the hook there, like the use fork command hook, for example, could, because that one already has access to the state, to the transition. If you go back to the hook,
Oh,
yeah, that's a bug I noticed, and it's a mistake that every time you switch to the search, it pre-selects
oh, it
that.
does.
It was an intended feature, but it shouldn't always do that. Only when you press Command Shift F, actually, but it does it on every time the search mounts. Yeah, so here you see we have the use branching animation,
Oh,
because the branch animation itself is also provided in the entire application. So
I wasn't aware of that. Okay,
yeah,
yeah. So you would rather.
I guess why. So the reason why we have the callbacks has been to avoid using other providers in features, or just trying to not couple, because once you have that, you need to always make sure that they are mounted in the right order. So with callbacks, at least we ensure that you cannot mistakenly mount the branch provider on top of the animation provider, and then all of a sudden that breaks without even knowing, at least until you get to the runtime.
Yeah, exactly. And you also have like there's a long story of routing as well. And now we actually do, like, because that's also something we do related to branch management, is updating the URL. And there's a long story there on how we wielded the Next.js router to our will, or what the term is. But now we do have like this use project editor router or something, which also makes things simpler for us.
Like even if you look at this, like wouldn't it? I know it might be very raw, but couldn't we say, okay, you want to start doing you click fork, right? And that perform function is being called. Okay, start branch animation, do the request. When the request is done, end branch animation. And do the routing in between somewhere. I'm not sure exactly on the routing. I think the routing needs, we have to see exactly when the route changes. Does it change immediately after you do the fork? No, I think it changes after you make the first, after we make the request and the branch is actually created, we do the routing, but then the new branch needs to load. So the branch animation still is still there until the new branch loads.
Yeah, exactly. What was I thinking? But does branch management only do, because that's one thing, that's forking. That's actually creating a new branch. And then we have just switching a branch.
Yeah.
But
that one is, if we look, let me open.
But I guess it's three things. It's like forking, it's switching, and it's also getting a list of all the branches.
Yeah. But all three are like the two, like the creating and getting are clear requests to the backend, whereas the switch is the one that I think what the moment where it reaches branch management, it only does call the callback for the project. So technically, we could dispatch directly into the project feature the changing of the branch.
Yeah. So would you kind of split it up into like use fork and use switch branch?
It's interesting. Like I'm trying to figure out how it works because we have this concept, like this half-baked command concept, which is like these are the hooks that are creating these commands, which are basically just functions that execute at some point, and then these functions can be registered to run from the command palette or to run when you click a button or any user interaction. And I'm wondering if commands should be, how powerful should these commands be? Like, should they also should they strictly dispatch things to providers, or don't care about actual? Should they be more? I guess should they be more like dispatches, or more like the Redux tongues or whatever concept we had in the past of like orchestrating different asynchronous flows? That's a question, because here we do deal with asynchronous flows, right? With fork and with listing branches.
Yeah, I think but that's a great thing about hooks. It's like if you just, even though the functionality is strictly tied to a command, you can still just create a hook for that logic that the command performs, and then you can include it with the command. But then you have the possibility to use that hook somewhere else. So what I would say is that I wouldn't write logic inside the command hook itself, but it can use a hook that has that logic. Because it wouldn't make sense. Like if you want to reuse the logic of a command, then you would kind of have to use the command hook to reach that logic, which doesn't make any sense because the hook just returns a command description.
Yeah, but we do that. Like in some cases, we already do that. But yeah, it's an interesting question. If you look at the fork command. And how it is used in the, for example, on getting started screen there at the fourth search group.
Oh, sorry.
No, there.
Here?
Like the getting started. No, the.
Oh, sorry. Here.
Lower. Yeah, there. So if you look at this, it's used as it's basically you take you get the command via the hook, and then whenever we have a button somewhere at the bottom there, and it says just command.perform. And the benefit of this is that so the command doesn't have anything to do with the command palette. Maybe it shouldn't be called command just to not have this confusion. But this command also has, for example, the shortcut attached to it. So if you have a button and you use a tooltip for the button, you can also add that there's a specific command, there's a specific component, and then when you hover over the button, you will also see the command there in the tooltip.
Ah,
So that's why I feel it's useful to reuse these commands outside of the command palette, because they're just the function plus some metadata for like
so
okay, tooltip generation or titles or whatever else. It just has 3 or 4 different fields. It doesn't have anything to do with the command palette.
yeah. But what I'm realizing now is that this is really a use fork hook then. It's just that kind of instead of calling it fork, you call it perform, like it's generic.
Yeah, exactly. It's a use fork hook which doesn't return just the function to do the fork, but also some metadata that you can use.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but this perform thing is ever this data used directly with the command palette?
Yeah.
So you can like give it the command palette this object and then
yeah.
So that's
if you
really
go to use register
command.
branch commands there on the search, you can see exactly that there are some hooks that register this object.
Yeah.
Adds some command palette things to it, like an icon or a section in the command palette where it appears, and then it's automatically inserted in the command palette.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because what I meant then as like a very concrete example is that you would indeed have like you would kind of use fork, it returns like a fork function, and then this would actually have use fork and then perform fork. Like then you can use fork wherever you want to do a fork, but it just happens that the use fork command performs a fork. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I didn't think about exposing just the raw function, but it does make sense like that.
Yeah, because it certainly, like, it's very explicit, like use fork, this is how you perform a fork, it's the fork hook, and that's what it does, and then we can use that fork function in different contexts. But one thing I do worry about when we just expose the functionality is that we don't know when we consume it, if we can consume it. So like how do we protect ourselves from, what if I was using the fork and just gave a button this function, like you could just click that button like crazy? How would we protect us from not allowing that? So one thing is like we are kind of protecting already, like these dispatches are protected. So if it was only these dispatches and you hit the fork multiple times, that would be just fine, because nothing would happen with the dispatches, but it would start a branching animation.
But this is it's a great question, because right now these commands are just dispatching. They defer the logic, or not the logic. They defer the execution to the feature, and we basically want to get rid of the feature. So would then state be brought into this use fork? So use fork would be more than just a function. It will also have some internal state.
Maybe we could explore that. Like if we take that concept, okay, now we want to create this explicitly this use fork hook, and then grabs the stuff from the branch management feature and put it into that fork and kind of see what do we end up with.
Because the way I feel right now is that we're kind of diving into like everything is a hook approach. which I personally like. Once you get used to custom hooks, I think like they're the most expressive
the
way.
bomb.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But yeah, we have to see one flow, I guess, to have a feel of it.
yeah, and to me, like the pattern I like is like hooks are amazing to just isolate concepts. So, for example, fork. And then the way I think about it, or been starting to think about it, is like, okay, I have some piece of logic that is a concept, like fork, for example. So maybe in the beginning of the app, you would just implement that in a component. But then you see that that you need to do that multiple places. So you take that logic, you shove it into a hook, and now you can use that multiple places. But then the question is, the state this hook is producing, should that be the same across all consumption points? And if that's the case, well, then that hook should be exposed through a context. So those are like the steps. It's like in the component, no reuse, okay, hook, oh, need consistent state across consumption, okay, expose it through a context provider. And it's the same thing you consume. It's like in the component you consume, for example, if the hook exposes a reducer. That's what I like about reducers, because they have state and they have the capability to trigger stuff like a dispatch. So you would use state and dispatch in the component. If you move the reducer and related logic into a hook, you still consume just a state and a dispatch. And if you put that hook, expose it on a context provider, you'd still expose the state and the dispatch. It's just how isolated and how like consistent the state is, yeah, if that's the right term. But yeah, we could.
Yeah.
But we could just to start, yeah, exploring. We could try to create a use fork hook and see where it gets us, and then we kind of, because there's a lot to reason about around the branch management. But at least this is something concrete to. I want to write some code, Alex.
Yeah. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay, so let's undo the stuff here. So let's keep this around, use for command. And so that's also kind of a question I have related to us kind of dropping these features is we already have a folder called hooks. I think that's more related to the dashboard, is it?
No, this is
everything.
It's a bit of a mess of everything.
Yeah.
Or are you? No, this is just generic hooks that are not that just generic hooks. They're used app wide.
Because how do you organize hooks normally? Do you put it like next to, like if you have one thing is having a hook that's used by one component, but if you have hooks used by multiple components, do you have like a hooks folder for it or?
Not yet. This one would be probably we need a bit of thinking there. So like the command palette hooks are separated under commands, but so all of these like definitions and registrations, they're all custom hooks. But this is just commands and command palette, so not related to other functionality.
Yeah. And we can just say immediately, like, this doesn't belong in Picture Client because Picture Client doesn't have anything to do with branch management.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but are you saying that you would kind of, like, we would have a lot of hooks here. So you would organize them more?
Probably we would organize them at some point.
Yeah. Okay. But let's add to the mess for now.
Yeah. I guess that's why I was saying earlier. If we go full in on custom hooks, because right now the hooks, right, with states, the hooks are kind of almost like generated, or they are very co-located with the feature.
Mm-hmm.
So let's figure that after, maybe, how we structure things.
And I guess I'm just adding, like, I would assume that we want, like, I guess that's a silly optimization. Yeah, maybe we shouldn't go into that stuff yet. Like, let's just return a function here to do the forking. Oh, I already had, it's all right. Okay. So the thing, so as we talked about, like, we could just expose this function to allow you to fork anywhere, but we would need currently we would need like the it's dispatching to the what's it called, to the branch management. So I guess what we want to kind of bring over here is the related to create branch. What's the difference of creating a branch and create draft branch?
A draft branch will have an auto-generated name, whereas the create branch has a specific name. Like when you type in a branch name in the command palette, you can say just my blah blah or something, and then it will give you the option to create branch named blah blah. Okay. So you predefine the name.
I see. Okay, so we have create branch, and it moves into creating branch. Which
one thing which I already noticed is a bit of a mess is that just permissions are all over the place. Like there's permission checks in the branch management there, like in the reducer.
Yeah,
I saw some permission changes or somewhere. But then you also have some in the fork. If you go back to your function, there's that beta access.
Yeah, because one thing I realized, like we talked about when we have, and so session is a good example. Like it's based on either you're like logged in or you're not logged in, and it's something you typically use multiple places in the app, as we can see here. And the thing is, like, you don't like us exploring, thinking about things as explicit states. When you look at the session, it has multiple states. Like you're not logged in, you're signing in, maybe it's in the beginning it's authenticating, or maybe you're logged in, and then it's like if you want to expose that session to the whole app, it's the way we have done it in the beginning is that we expose the whole session, but then we have a hook that allows you to say use session in a specific state, like in the authenticated state. But what's also possible to do, which is arguably better, is that instead of having like one context provider for the whole session, what you do is that you create a context provider for the authenticated session. And that context provider is used when you're authenticated and you actually render out the app in an authenticated mode. So you use like a use authenticated session hook instead, and that then it's more tied together, like the provider and the use and the hook itself. So that's like a pattern we haven't used here, but that's also possible to do. And maybe this kind of puts us in to a discovery where maybe one of the things we should look at first is the session, but we can ignore that for now.
I think as long as the current behavior is provided top level and we can access it, doesn't really block us from building this.
Exactly. So the creating branch is basically just calling our API to create the branch. So that means
the question here is do we use that's one thing that I'm a bit unsure yet of do we still use that API environment layer, which basically is event based, not promise based. Should
Oh
we
yeah.
use that like it is in the future, or should we go for the promise based abstraction, which is also exists somewhere?
Yeah. 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 The
Because this
thing
is
is,
this is the interesting part about the branch management. It's all about async flows. So the way we want to deal is maybe we need to figure out how to deal with
yeah.
async. And it's actually it's a good point to talk about this, because um, this is one of the mistakes I feel a lot of. Yeah, I personally did on a lot of previous projects, was just taking all the async flows through state management and making a mess out of all these things, when some of them are really straightforward. Like you either are not fetching, or you have data, or you have error. Like it's a finite state, let's say, for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the thing I just hate about promises is that they're not compatible with hooks or components, because they might out unmount when you're still running the promise, and then you get errors in React. It's not like it breaks React. It's just there's just like some principle difference of how React works and how promises work.
Yeah.
But we can do it. Like we should just explore
Yeah.
everything.
But it's interesting because also like what the event based API allows us to do is to very easily feed in new data uh, from other clients. Like when you have like real time data coming through.
Yeah,
So
and also
if
one
these
thing I
hooks can
realized.
also react to that, so if these hooks can also say, oh, I want to subscribe to this event that's coming from Picture, it's coming from the maybe from the GraphQL API at some point. I want to, instead of waiting for the promise for the branch to be created, I can subscribe to some event or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And what I also realized is it might be that architecture actually allows you to avoid context providers, because if you were to use this fork, so let's imagine we give this fork some state of, is it like forking now, or is it creating the branch, and so on. If you do it event based, it means that you can use that hook multiple times, and each hook has its own state. But since all of them listen to the same events, they will all produce the same state. So that's also a way to think about it. It's that you don't need to make that state central, because they all listen to the same events and they will all produce the same state regardless of where you triggered the fork from. It was just a thought I had. I'm not saying it's a good idea. It's just interesting. It enables it, at least.
But this fork, then this hook that you have in mind, should it also return the state of the fork request, so to say, or should it be just the function?
Yeah, exactly.
Should it also return, for example, basically the is forking or something like that, like in forking progress or something?
Yeah, exactly. But it does have, like, I would imagine if you want to trigger a fork, you also want to know the progress of that fork, because you probably have a button, just as simple as like clicking a button and disabling it.
Yeah.
And it might have an error as well that you need to know about, or you would have to, like, the hook would have to like return, like the function would have to return a promise, and then you would have to track that promise in the consuming component. But that seems unnecessary. So yeah, I would definitely return the state, and then it's more a question of how you return that state. I think, is it use query? Like, does that do something like is loading error and data or something? And then fetch, or is it use fetch? Can't remember.
I don't know the exact syntax either, but
Or maybe it's something like this. Error is loading. But we can do something very simple here first. You can go and grab the session. Where the session coming from?
Yeah, we have the use query. But this one is over GraphQL.
We have. Are we using the environment there? Oh. So annoying that it adds the slash there. But you meant like the REST API? I think that's optional, which is a little bit... No, we don't have a REST a CSB API. But it's optional? Do you know why it's optional?
Oh. Is it maybe because the environment is by default is null?
It's typed as optional.
Oh.
I'm not quite sure why it's like that. Let's see. And then we have use session. Okay. So
if you search for, we have something similar in I'm not sure what this one use. There's a hook called use remove branch, which is just at your lower left side of the screen. And it's very similar with and it uses it uses SVR for the actual request.
Yeah.
And then we pass in the, and it has that data error status thing. I'm not saying we should follow it, just something to look into maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because that's something I'm going to argue pretty hard, is that these hooks at least return something like this, like so it doesn't return like is loading or error.
Yeah. I would also argue for that, because we already have it baked in to do state matching and stuff like that.
So use SVR doesn't actually hold. What does use SVR do? Does it take the promise and make sure that if you call multiple times, it doesn't do that, and so on?
To be honest, I don't know about multiple calls. I know it deals with mostly with caching and with like basically optimizing the request.
So it
I
makes
think Maria
a request.
and Gianmarco know a bit more about how this was implemented, because they added it for the dashboard, and then it got used in some other places as well. But
yeah, I guess a tricky thing with use SVR I see here is that I guess it's like when you give it a string, that's when it makes the request. Yeah. And when it's null, it doesn't do that. But that means that you have to pass into the hook. Like with the use fork, if we return a function here, we can't like trigger the fetch with a use SVR hook, because the use SVR hook has to be up.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, no, probably use SVR should be for more like, okay, I just need the data no matter what.
Yeah, like
there should be a pattern for use SVR for kind of like, because what we do here is more like a mutation, right? Not a query. You could argue that the fork is a mutation.
Yeah, exactly.
I see it has a mutate API as well.
Yeah, but does use SVR have? Maybe it has different signatures. So like if you don't, I would expect it to have something here. Mutate. What's that?
Yeah.
Is validating. Is mutate something you can call or? Yeah, I don't know. I'm not too familiar with that one.
We can also just use the CSB API for now. And
yeah, it's just yeah. One thing I'm also thinking about is like testing, because if you use low-level APIs to do data fetching, it's harder to write tests. Like that's what I like now. We can just fire an event synchronously in the test, and it works. But now we have to mock. Like in this case, if we were to use the CSB API, we have to mock the delete. And also the CSB API, like you have to write the URLs into the application code. Like this you have, so this is like, you kind of have this in the application code. So where if you would kind of not have like CSB API as a post, delete, and so on, it would actually be delete, what's this? Delete sandbox? Sorry, delete branch. You would probably pass like the base URL in, and if we change the base URL, there was just one place to change that base URL. While now we have to search the whole code base for this magical string and hope, cross our fingers that we hit all of them, kind of thing. So I see like CSB API is really nice to have as an abstraction over like fetch, but I still think like using it for me is too low level to be used in the app itself, because you have these magical strings.
Let's go with the existing one. Let's just use the environment in the fork. Use fork, and go with the event-based API. Like it's basically how it's here, but instead of dispatching, we could say API dot branch or whatever I'm not sure what the name is there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, great. So we can just call these, and then
it produces
the question
events.
Yeah, how do we listen then to events here?
Yeah.
Inside the hook, and yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then because then the thing is like every time you hit fork, then we will create the branch. So we have to.
But why can't we?
Like if we were to replace it here, like every time the fork function is called, we will actually create the branch in the API.
We could also like have like a state, right? The moment where like mimic the what's happening now in branch management, where create branch transitions to a new state.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, maybe we could just create like a simplified version of that.
Yeah. I still feel like the branch management shouldn't be in my mind shouldn't be in a provider, because it is you can split it in, okay, there's a fork functionality and there's a branch list functionality, and then there is a rename or change branch functionality, and all of them can be actually done separately and
Exactly.
like very isolated hooks, maybe it's right. Then that just do that, and we don't have to worry about where they are provided and how they are consumed and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly.
I
Because
like
that's how I
this
think about it
model.
as
For
well.
some
There's
reason, this feels very natural once we worked with features to just have very atomic, very low level like states, very small states compared to like when you look at the workspace feature or one of the other features, we have all these convoluted states of just adding more and more data on the same object.
Yeah, and this should be like forking. And I guess in this case, I'm making an assumption here is like we do want to know when we have actually forked, because that's like an end state. Like fork is special that way. It's not like you're adding something and then you kind of go back to where you were. It's like your final state is that you're forked, and that's when you want to do something quite disruptive in the experience. It's like moving somewhere else. But we can change that if it's.
I feel like for directly consuming endpoints, it's better to have something like SVR, where you just say, okay, I want the data from this endpoint, and whenever just cache it, whenever I'm requesting it, make sure you don't double fetch it and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But this is more like a mutation with effects. So we need to.
Use reducer. Oh. And then what we're really returning here is we're just dispatching that we want to fork, and then when we actually move into forking, that's when we start forking. So now we can click like crazy on fork. It doesn't matter. It will only start the forking when it actually.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Like instead of this being a feature, it's actually a consumption of other features and other things that we have there.
Yeah.
It's just a consumption hook that orchestrates these.
Where does the new branch name come from?
It should be a parameter.
Oh, so you pass it in, and then source branch name comes from project.
Yeah, because you need to. Yeah, you need to know the two. I think the two parameters of use fork command should also be the parameters here, from and the new branch name.
Where did I go? From? Where's that coming from?
First parameter.
Okay. And okay, so we want to do these when we actually fork.
Yeah.
So we would have them as here. And then we will pass it.
No. You have them. No. This is for when you use the hook. So these are params for the hook.
Do you know the new branch name already when you consume the hook?
You could. I mean, if you want for example, if you're in the context of the command palette, as you're typing in, every time you type in the command, the React component will run again, will re-render. So then the query from the command palette will be the parameter for use fork.
Okay. Yeah, that's, yeah. Yeah, how does that work here? And then, okay, so that works in this case because you're always returning a new object. So it closes over this, but in this case, like we'll only have access to the initial new branch name because we're creating an effect here. And this effect doesn't change.
How does... Yeah, no, but it still works, I think, for like when you... How do you consume this? You just call use fork for example, if you go to the fork button at the top, then the new branch name is undefined. You don't pass it because it will create a draft branch. And I think that you can probably just for now omit the new branch name because there's no, other than the command palette, there's no flow through which you can create a branch with a name, with a given name. You always do fork and then you rename it.
Yeah.
So yeah, to keep it simple, let's remove it. No.
Yeah, exactly. I was just, the one thing is the from. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I guess it's like arguable when do you pass the new name? Is it when you actually call fork? Or is it when you use the hook? But yeah, it doesn't matter in this.
The question is, do you use this hook only once for all the fork functionality, or do you use it twice? Once for, because in the top there you have fork from main and fork from current branch.
Let's see. Owner.
By the way, does the stream have like an end time for like...
Yeah, it was supposed to be 10. We should probably stop. I thought we could just grab the owner repo. Oh, so we have the source. Yeah, source branch name. Oh, sorry. Owner repo. Source branch name. Yeah, and then it had optionally a new one, but we don't care about that. Yeah, and then, yeah, because we have start branching animation, and that was, and we have stop as well. Yeah. So you will kind of do, just to kind of wrap up the example.
Yeah, you could say the stop is
when you get an error. Oh, sorry.
You need to import it.
Stop branching animation.
You see, and this already makes it way easier that it's not split like this.
Yeah.
It works well with the providers and the callbacks, but it's just the fact that this logic is like in different places makes it very much harder to follow the flow.
Yeah, exactly. Create branch success. API create branch error. And then we would just subscribe to the So API. what do we call it? Events. Yeah, sorry. Use effect.
No, use events.
Yeah, I'm just avoiding it because it's old. And this is all it does. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and then we could just return. Let's see.
So is this more like is this a feature, but it's not provided?
Yeah, like the way I'm thinking about it, it's just a reducer. Like it has like forking, like most asynchronous flows. You need, it has multiple states, and then or it has state because you yeah, and then it's just what expresses best that state, use state or reducer. So it's just the way I think about it, it's just a hook that returns a reducer. And then we just happen to make sure that if you try to dispatch fork multiple times, we make sure that it's actually valid.
Oh, so now, so it returns the reducer, means that you could say then fork dot. Yeah, you just dispatch the.
Yeah, or we could of course do like state and then. Yeah, exactly, to make it even more. Since it's just.
Yeah, I'm wondering if for developer experience this is even better, maybe.
Yeah.
To not. I think if it's interesting if one of these hooks has multiple dispatches, then it's probably a feature that needs to be provided at the top level, because there are multiple user actions that interact with it, and probably from different parts.
Yeah.
Whereas here, this one is just makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then there's like the argument, and then it's like the question is, do we do forking multiple places, or do we just use it once? And I guess you could easily argue that it doesn't need to be a context provider, because if you do use the fork, like it's so disruptive that like you wouldn't call it in the command palette and then go and click the button later, and that will cause two different. But you could argue that when you use the command palette, it should like fade out the button, the fork button. So you want to know the state of the forking at a global level. And in that sense, it would be ideal to expose it as a context provider, because then they at least share the state.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. Or we could like say that, we actually don't. Also, when we're idle, we also listen to these events, and then they will be in sync.
So right now, what happens is in the use fork here, if you call this twice, you will get two reducers, right?
Yeah.
So two different, two
instances, yeah. So that's what I meant when I said like the levels of thinking is like, if we were just forking one place, we wouldn't even create a hook. We would just implement what we did now in the component that does the forking. Well, now we like moved it to a hook, and then we're evaluating, is this state actually global? Let's just take what we return here and put it on a context.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think it is in a way a global state. It's just that it was hidden in branch management, and now it makes sense for it to be like a feature or whatever we want to call it on its own.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Especially for what you said, like when you fork from the command palette, you want the button at the top to change, or
Yeah.
vice versa. When like you fork there, but somehow you open the command palette, you shouldn't. I don't know, like some sort of logic that prohibits you from, or just doesn't allow this state to be duplicated. It's a single thing. It's a single state.
Mm. Yeah, and it's really like it's a bit sad, like the complexity you add with it's so to the point. Like you can argue the implementation of how we actually do the fork, but it's so concise to have the hook itself to deal with this and just expose the state and the ability to do the fork. And then to make it global, you have to create a context provider. You have to figure out where in the component tree does this context provider need to live. And if you miss out and we kind of use fork at a later point, it might not even work because the context provider was put at a level that doesn't cover this new spot we suddenly started using the fork. So it's incredibly fragile, and that's why you have a tendency to have all the context providers at the top to avoid that future problem.
Could we try something like a single provider to expose multiple of these slices and some almost like a combined reducer style, right? Where you say, I want, fork. Because right now in my head, this use fork makes a lot more sense than branch management. So it's yay for fork and nay for branch management when it comes to how do you think about a feature. Because branch management was just like a bucket of requests that would overlap each other in state transitions and stuff like that. So then how about somehow registering each of these hooks on a single provider that just gives you, okay, give me some sort of state fiber, whatever I want to call it.
Exactly.
Give me this across the application without worrying about where it is. Top level doesn't matter. It's an application concern.
But that could definitely work, and it's interesting. Like we have so many collaborative features, and it made me think like the commit we have. It's what's interesting about the commit. We kind of have the same problem there, but the hooks live on two different clients. So because both of them can trigger the commit, right? Both of them can call commit, but they live on different clients. And it's kind of the same thing here. If you think about the instances of these hooks as being on multiple clients and they need to collaborate together, what you could do here, which is kind of fascinating, is that instead of you would still have fork, but instead of let's see, instead of moving into the forking state, now we're kind of looking at another concept here, the command thingy. But let's imagine like forking is like a command. We don't have to talk about this command, but instead of doing this, we would stay like sorry, I'll just quickly do this. What's it called? Fork. Why are you yelling? Oh, implicitly has a... Why does it have that? Any type? That's weird. Yeah, doesn't matter. My point is that... Oh, sorry. It needs to be optional. Anyways, that's not the point. Instead of... oh, what was I going to say? Yes. So imagine that we actually have an API event here coming in, which is fetch, what was it? Create branch. Oh my god, come on. Create branch started or something. Like that's the same we have with the commits. It's like the commit started.
Exactly.
And that's when you move into forking. So my point is that when you hit fork, it doesn't change its state. It just calls the fork on the API, just like it does here. Sorry, create branch. But then the API actually emits an event that it started creating the branch, so that it tells the whole system that, hey, I just started creating a branch. So it doesn't matter like how many instances. I'm trying to tie this into collaboration. So it doesn't matter how many instances you have, as long as that instance is in an idle state and it gets that the create branch started, it will move into a forking state. So that's kind of what I mean. It's like, what if the hooks were collaborative, the same way we think about collaborative features across clients? That's also
the only thing I have here as a note is that sometimes you want, because I also kept thinking about this pattern, like, do we need to differentiate between when I create a shell or when another client creates a shell? And you do have to differentiate. So we have to be careful there, because sometimes and when an event or when an action needs to happen, like create terminal, sometimes it needs to be with the side effect of adding the terminal, for example, the sidekick. Other times it's only about adding it into the list of available terminals that you can see because someone else created it. So it's the same here, and the same with the commit, right? If the commit button, for example, needs to have a loading spinner, maybe it shouldn't appear to all the clients. Maybe only the badge at the top is like the global state, but the input there should not be. I don't know. Just maybe the commit is a bad example, because someone commits, someone else should not commit. But the terminal is a better example here. Like sometimes you need some effect that only happens on the way in, not on the upstream events coming in from that.
Exactly. Yeah, because like in this case, you would kind of say, like, if you want some local state because you were the initiator.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. But then if someone else were to trigger, in this case, the fork, you would rather have this common state.
Almost like you need a transient state there.
Yeah, like initiated fork. So you would go here and you would say initiated fork. Yeah, because that's also a thing. You only want to actually start this is nice, because you only want to start the actual forking with the person who initiates it. So if you're idle, we would still have this create a branch started kind of thing, and it would move us into
forking. Is a bit weird, because when you click fork, the other client shouldn't do anything, shouldn't see anything, shouldn't react to anything, right? It's just exactly your context changing.
Yeah, so it would kind of
technically you could say you could have a feature that says follow through fork or something like that.
Yeah.
And then when the fork is done, you could actually say, oh, but actually now all the clients should at least get a notification that a fork was done from this client, from this container. And give them the option to follow through. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because this, like, pointing to commit again, this is exactly how commit is modeled. It's nothing's happening, or you initiate the commit, which puts you in a committing state. But then we have a commit started state and a committed state. So as the person committing, you first go into committing state, and then when the commit actually starts, you go into commit started. But for the other person, they go straight from not committing into a commit started state because they are not the initiator of the commit.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Yeah. But yeah, and it's fascinating that there is a way around. Like, I guess there's more, as you said, like you could have like shared state slices in a common context provider. That's one way to deal with it. But it's also interesting to see that when things are event based, you can also avoid context providers this way. You use the same mechanism as collaboration, basically. Yeah. But I guess that's something we have to, maybe this is a good thing to think about. Like, it totally makes sense that we should split up the features into individual forks to isolate. They cover too much functionality now. And then the question is more, how do we want to
consume
consume them, like make the state of them consistent? Do we want to avoid context providers? Do we want to do this slicing thing, or do we want to think of them as doing something like this?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. But I guess we should just, for the next round, let's try to conclude on something asynchronously, and then we can try that out at least on the next stream.
And
then
try with a different feature.
Yeah, exactly.
But just to conclude on this, you see, when I think about the feature, it still makes sense that feature or ability or capability or whatever you want to call it, it makes much more sense that fork is a feature now. It doesn't matter whether we do a provider or not, just the concept of, so maybe they should still be, these hooks should still be under features as a concept.
Yeah.
Because then you can look at an application. Like, I like this idea of how can the architecture screen what you can do, right? And instead of seeing like hooks and components, you see features, and then you go to read through the features and you kind of understand, oh, this application does a fork, does a commit, does create terminals, whatever.
Exactly. I really like that. And then it's more like, because when you think about that from the perspective of Pitcher client, it makes so much more sense. It's like you're exposing an API to a developer to do something, like provide functionality. And we should think the same way here. It's like we're providing functionality. We're creating our own API to do stuff.
And instead of thinking of a feature as one-to-one to a section of feature, like we thought of we need what's the best example? Not the workspace, but
like a Git as a feature. Like Git is a good example because it has a lot of functionality.
Doesn't make sense because Git is multiple features in one, and then basically feature. Then it just creates this kind of impression of redundancy. Like, oh, I need to create one feature, and then I need to add all the Git stuff in there, and then I need to go to feature client and add the same stuff again there. But if feature client already exposes all the functionalities, then we build features on top of those functionalities, and maybe for the feature Git client, we have 6 different features built on top, which are 6 different hooks with reducers that some of them are provided at the top level, some of them are not. Doesn't really matter, but they are basically the features that we build on top of feature client.
Oh, it was just my recording. It's taking a lot of space, these recordings. I think I can turn it off. I don't want local recordings. Anyways, that's for later.
I think we went a bit over here, but it was really, really nice to think about these things.
Yeah. Yeah, and also this subscription, like event-based thing, it ties into the picture client hooks as well. We talked about like you can get the initial value from a hook, but then you have to subscribe to updates because you might want the updated values to be part of, like you have your own reducer in your app and you want to integrate, for example, the Git status. So you don't want to consume the Git status directly. You want to put it into your own reducer to evaluate what the state of your app is related to the Git status, which is also interesting here is like when we think about the API as events, that it's kind of the same concept. Instead of like just consuming the API, you rather subscribe to events so that we can more easily like put that state into our custom reducer, which is really related to forking. But yeah, it just came to mind that we also think about subscriptions and events in
but then
client.
there might be some parts of feature client that we just want to consume directly.
Yeah.
Like the list of tasks, the list of ports, the list of files. They shouldn't be kept in a. They shouldn't do, the features should not duplicate the state of feature client, so to say.
Yeah.
So like if feature client can provide all the tasks on demand, then we need a way to consume that directly into the component where you want to list the tasks, as well as a way to expose all the mutations that you can send from the client. But there's no state management involved there. Like for tasks, it's just, and that will be an interesting thing to tackle maybe later in the week. Like a stateless feature. How do we consume directly feature client into components?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's interesting.
Like, spoiler alert, it's going to be a hook again, but how would that hook look like?
Yeah, and it's interesting. We have such a wide range of things we need to do within these hooks. Like, so for example, the Git status, it could be a hook that it just gives you the Git status, and whenever the Git status updates, you get a new Git status. And then if you wanted to react to, like if you have your own reducer and you want to change the state of your own reducer related to the Git status changing, you could also use an effect to do so. So you would dispatch into your own reducer whenever the Git status changes. That's one way to react to changes to the Git status. Or you could have Git status and then subscribe, and then you avoid a round trip. But you would kind of do this instead. So you don't have to like reconcile once before you dispatch into the reducer. It just happens immediately when the value updates. But then we also have hooks like commit, which isn't just a value. It's not like committing isn't a value we return like Git status. It's more multiple steps. Like as we talked about, committing and commit started and commit finished, and but yeah, it's going to be interesting. Like it would just be nice to find like some common pattern to this that we can use. But anyways, let's we'll just keep this branch for now, and then next time we can conclude on how we want to share the state of forking.
Yeah, sounds good.
And then we can even try it out. See if it works. Cool. But yeah, this is I think we made a lot of progress. Like we even made some conclusions there. So that's good. And then it's more, and it's the same, like, for me, it's the same within the hook as well. Like, does it even need to have an internal state? If it needs to have internal state, is it so simple that we can just use state? But if it's not that simple, can we use a reducer? And that doesn't require us to like guard the actions coming in. Like, can we trust that when the action comes in that we can just change the state? And if we can trust that, then it's like adding a transition on top of it to make sure that it's not being consumed the wrong way. Yeah. Anyways, let's get to work.
Yeah, sure.